All right, good morning, U.S. history. Welcome to Tuesday, March 31st. Today we're going to go through um, notes posted on Canvas for U.S. foreign policy in the 1980s. What this is going to do is going to follow right along with the note catcher. So as you follow along, you can fill out the note catcher, use the notes to kind of help you out, and then you can submit that to Canvas when you are done. So what we're going to start doing here, I'll share my screen with you. And okay, so let's see here. Sorry, guys. I'm going to stop this real quick. I just want to. Okay, cool. All right, let's go back here. We'll share. All right. U.S. foreign policy in the 1980s. This is again from our Unit 4. This is the second point. So last week when we looked at politics, now we are looking at foreign policy. So I can explain how expanded foreign policy influence impacted anti-American feelings abroad. So we start to look here at the Reagan Doctrine. The Reagan Doctrine being this buildup of the military. So Reagan comes into office in 1980, continues to 1988, and really ramped up military support, military spending there in the 1980s. He was supporting guerrilla troops, and I always used to think it was like, monkeys, like monkey guerrillas. No, these are like freedom fighters, informal, not necessarily associated with a country's military, but these were groups fighting communism around the world. President Carter had sent about $30 million in aid to these Afghan guerrillas. And Reagan ended up saying, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send $570 million more. So whereas Carter was sending military aid, both, obviously Democrats and Republicans both did that. The Republicans here with Ronald Reagan sent much, much more aid to these guerrilla freedom fighters in places like Nicaragua and Grenada. So you can see down here, Nicaragua in Central America. And we see the tiny island of Grenada here. So you have Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, San Juans, your ABC islands here. Grenada and Nicaragua, this is where some of that money was going to kind of fight communists in those countries. So now we get to this guy right here, Oliver North. Now, Congress had prohibited aid to these Nicaraguan Contras, these freedom fighters. So the Congress had said, listen, we don't support this. You cannot continue to send money to these, groups around the world. However, the Reagan administration continued to illegally support these Nicaraguan Contra fighters. The way they did it was they secretly sold weapons to Iran in exchange for the release of those hostages. So think back to what we talked about in Unit 3 with the hostage crisis. We sold weapons to Iran, and then the money that we got from those Iranian weapons deals, then we sent to those Nicaraguan freedom fighters. So all of this kind of came to light in November of 1986, and this is Marine Colonel Oliver North. And he was kind of selected to be the fall man for this, and had to go and testify that, yes, he was in fact aware that even though Congress had said, hey, you can't send them money. They're like, well, we didn't. We sold we sold weapons to Iran. The money that we got from the Iranian weapons sales, we sent to these Nicaraguan fighters. So I have a linked video here. I would encourage you to view that. It's just a real short thing that talks about the Iran-Contra affair is what it was called. So this was the one that on the vocab that everybody was putting like, oh, Star Wars, a movie directed by George Lucas. That's not the Star Wars we were talking about. So at this point in time, again, we've had the Cold War going on for the better part of 3 or 4 decades at this point, and there are enough nuclear weapons in the world for this first word here, for mutual assured destruction. What that means is there's more than enough nuclear weapons in the world at this point to destroy the entire planet multiple times over. So this idea that the Russians have missiles pointed at us, that we have missiles pointed at the Russians, what we wanted to do is we wanted to form some kind of barrier, something that would be able to detect these missiles being shot from the Soviet Union towards the United States. So we had these different levels of protection. So the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was nicknamed Star Wars, which was using satellites to determine, okay, we detect missiles being fired from the Soviet Union towards the United States, that we would have certain fail safes, that we would have try to be able to shoot it out of the air at a certain point, that we could use planes if we, that would be scrambled in order to shoot these missiles down with enough time. The entire point was to intercept incoming missiles from the Soviet Union. So again, Star Wars is the slang term for that strategic defense initiative that was used to kind of be aware or keep tabs on missiles coming in from the Soviet Union. All right, this fine-looking gentleman right here is the name Mikhail Gorbachev, and he is the leader of the Soviet Union. He's the last leader of the communist Soviet Union, and actually, he and President Reagan had a very good rapport. They got along with each other very much, or very well, and met with President Reagan for a series of meetings. Now, this link right here, this quote, "tear down this wall." This comes from Ronald Reagan, a speech that Reagan gave in front of the Berlin Wall, where he was challenging Mikhail Gorbachev. His quote was, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." He basically saying, like, time's up. We cannot continue to have this kind of disagreement between the Soviet Union and the United States. We want to, they kind of use the Berlin Wall as that symbol of old world communism versus the free West. And I encourage you to view that speech. It's probably one of the most famous speeches by a president, especially, during the 1980s. This is one of the most quotable ones where Ronald Reagan is really challenging this guy here, Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the wall in Berlin. Okay, so these two terms here, they will appear again somewhere, and I would encourage those people that are either watching live or viewing later, make a note of these two words, the Russian words. First one is perestroika. Perestroika is Russian for restructuring, and then the second one is glasnost, which is openness. And these were two terms that were used to define kind of the building of this new relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. We're seeing here that, this is Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan. Eventually in 1991, so now Reagan's out of office, H.W. Bush is president, there's a coup stage, or an overthrow of the government where Mikhail Gorbachev was arrested, and Russian President Boris Yeltsin defies this coup. And it was at this point in August of 1991 that 15 Soviet republics, so if you think of the Soviet Union, was kind of like the United States, where you have these different, Soviet states together, they're all under communism. 15 of them declare their independence. They basically say, we're no longer a part of the Soviet Union. So now Russia and these 15 Soviet republics, most of them you see on those border states or border countries between Eastern Europe and Russia and the former Soviet Union. Jumping back a couple years, now we're into China. The Tiananmen Square, this is probably one of the most famous images of Tiananmen Square. This guy right here is known as Tank Man. He's an unknown protester that stood in front of a line of Chinese tanks trying to break up a student and worker protest in Beijing. Government tanks and soldiers took the square by force. Many were killed, hundreds were arrested. Again, here's a link here that can kind of give you a little bit of background on Tank Man. I would encourage you can get into a YouTube hole of watching videos on Tank Man. No one quite knows what happened to this guy. He was escorted away. Some people say he was smuggled out of the country by the student and workers. Some people say he might have been killed by the Chinese military. No one really knows what happened to Tank Man. And the only reason that this image ever made it out of China was that the American photographer that took it put the film in the tank of his toilet until the secret police had come through and searched his room and said, oh, okay, they took all his film, but they were able to get this image out of Russia. And this is one of those, or out, I'm sorry, out of China. This is one of those images where if you go to China today, because of their firewalls and the search filters and blocks, if you were to look up Tiananmen Square inside China today, you're only going to see like vacation photos of that area. You're not going to see the image of Tank Man. So now we're looking at the fall of the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall came down on November 9th, 1989. The spokesman for East Berlin's Communist Party announced that on that night that citizens may begin to cross the border without travel visas. So it kind of became a point where everyone starts flooding to the wall. 2 million people begin to tear down the wall by hand. So November 9th of 89, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. Again, there's a linked video there. I encourage you to view that. This is kind of seen as the fall of communism and the end of the Cold War, where you see the wall between East and West Berlin being torn down by hand, and kind of this beginning of the end of what was the Soviet Union and now becomes Russia and those 15 free states. Operation Desert Storm. So we're dipping our toes a little bit into the early 90s here. This is the dictator of the country of Iraq, Saddam Hussein. And in January of 1991, he invaded the tiny country of Kuwait, which borders the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. And the United States imposed economic sanctions on Iraq. We sent 500,000 American troops to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and began a targeted attack within Iraq. The big difference between this Operation Desert Storm and what came later after 9/11 was the fact that we never actually crossed into Iraq at that point. We were just kind of firing missiles back and forth. It was very, very short, did not last very long. We lost 300 troops in Operation Desert Shield, which became Desert Storm. However, Saddam Hussein remained in power. We did not kind of remove him at that point, and that's something that we'll begin to kind of see come back in the late 90s and early 2000s with George W. Bush. But again, Iraq begins to invade Kuwait. We go and go to Saudi Arabia, go to Kuwait, and push the Iraqi troops back into Iraq. However, on their way out, they start lighting fires on all these oil fields. And again, you can view that video there. Here's some images there of these are missiles being fired into and out of Iraq. So you can see the nation of Kuwait here right on the Persian Gulf. Okay, here's Saudi Arabia, and here's Iraq with Baghdad being their capital. So we were within Saudi Arabia, we were within Kuwait, but we did not cross into Iraq at this point. So here's a quote here that kind of looks at Reagan and what he felt his greatest accomplishments were and how he felt that he was able to establish peace. So again, I would encourage you guys to take a look at those quotes and reflect on these two questions. So as we go back here, do I have any questions from you guys right now? Okay. So those of you viewing the video at a later date, again, these notes are posted on Canvas. The note catcher there, you can kind of fill those out, and that would be one of those things that you can be doing this week. Pop this up and just share our schedule so I can kind of talk through it. So we reviewed the U.S. foreign policy notes and the note catcher. Again, those you can submit to Canvas here when it is complete. tomorrow, something to look at, Cold War in the 1980s. There are these events here. Reagan visits the Berlin Wall, the Missile Alert System, Malta Summit, the INF Treaty, Strategic Defense Initiative, and Mikhail Gorbachev. What you need to do is you need to put those events in order, and for each of the events, answer these 4 questions. So this will be something that would take you a little bit of time. But again, when you're done, you can submit there to Canvas. On Thursday at our same time at about 10 a.m., we're going to review those domestic issue notes. So those are going to be things like the Exxon Valdez oil spill and the Just Say No program. That will be Thursday at 10 a.m. And then Friday, this learning target review. There's 3 things here. Explain the significance of the end of the Cold War. Use documents to cite 3 reasons for United States supporting anti-communist fighters. So that would be something we pulled from today. And then the greatest impact on 1980s culture, whether it's music, cable, or expansion of U.S. influence in the Middle East. So I know that's quite a bit of work for you guys, but I feel that you guys have some time to kind of get those done. If you have questions, please feel free to shoot me an email, and we can set up another time, whether we can, communicate through email, or we can set up a Zoom or a Google Meet or something like that, so we could kind of chat and answer any questions that you might have. All right, guys. So at this point, I think I'm good. I've covered that. I'm going to download this. I'll post it to YouTube once it has fully rendered. And yeah, take a look at the Cold War in the 1980s tomorrow, and then Thursday at 10 a.m. we'll pop on and do domestic issues. Any other things for the good of the order? Okay, well, take some time today, get outside. Like I said, it does look kind of sunny out there, so get some sunshine, get that vitamin D. Stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, and I will see you guys all on Thursday. Have a great day.